Drawing is hard, but it's not impossible. You just have to learn to see in a new way. Douglas Simonson here, coming to you from Mexico with a video that gives you the honest truth about drawing. It's hard. The good news is it's possible for anyone. You don't have to be talented, but you do have to be willing to do the work it takes to learn to see in a new way, to see like an artist. In this video, I'm going to point out some of the ways you can learn to see in a new way, in a way that will help you draw better. By the way, this video is mostly concerned with line drawing, not with shading. Shading falls under the umbrella of values, and I talk about that in another video on this channel, which is called Color Doesn't Matter, and you should definitely check that out. Okay, let's learn to see like an artist. Learning to see the big shapes is number one. It's a vital first step to learning to see like an artist. If you start out by trying to draw every little detail, you're probably going to end up with a drawing that has lots of details but never really comes together. I know this is hard for you to hear if you love all those little details, but trust me, if you want a drawing that works, you need to start with the big shapes. You can get to the details later. When you see the big shapes, you are seeing the basic structure of the image. That gives you a strong foundation so that when you do add the details, you'll be adding them to a drawing that already works. So, how do you learn to see the big shapes? Well, the easiest way is to squint, like this. You narrow your eyes so that you can't see the image very well. It gets all blurry, and you can't see anything but the big shapes. There is a digital way to squint, and it's called blurring. And you can find it in just about any image manipulation app. I use Photoshop, and specifically I use a filter called Gaussian Blur, and that's what you see here. Then I use the Posterize filter, which does this. And now you can see the big shapes really easily. When you start your drawing with the big shapes, all the little shapes will come much more easily, and you will just end up with a better, stronger drawing. Learn to see negative spaces. This is step 2 in learning to see like an artist. Usually we look just at the positive space, which is the subject matter, the things that we're usually interested in looking at, like the people in a photograph. Most people aren't even aware of the negative spaces, and the negative spaces are everything that isn't the subject matter. As an artist, you want to learn to see the negative spaces and use them. They're just as important as the positive spaces. When you're able to see the negative spaces, it's easier to get the positive spaces right. Sometimes it's hard to tell which are the positive spaces and which are the negative spaces, but it doesn't really matter. The important thing is now you're seeing all the spaces and the way they fit together to make your image. And that is going to help your drawing. Well, you've learned to see the big shapes, and you've learned that some of them are positive and some of them are negative. Now it's time to look at the relationships between the shapes. For instance, compare this shape to this shape. Notice the difference in size, the difference in shape, where they are in relation to each other. All of that is important. And there's also a really handy tool for seeing these relationships even better, and that's called reference points. For example, the bottom of this ear is just a little above the halfway point on the picture frame. Make a mark on your drawing page so you know where the bottom of that ear should hit. The bottom of the ear on the other side hits the picture frame significantly higher up, so you can make a mark there too. And then the highest point of the hairline hits the picture frame about here. And the tip of the guy's chin hits the picture frame here. These are reference points using the picture frame. And by the way, your picture frame reference points will only work if your picture frame has the same proportions as your source image. If it's too wide, you may end up with something like this. And if it's too narrow, you may end up with something like this. You can also have reference points within the image. For example, if we drop a line from the outer edge of this ear, we can see where it hits different points on the neck and the jacket, and then make sure our drawing matches. You can do this anywhere in the image, whatever works for you. Draw a line from the lower shoulder upward and see where it hits the ear. Or draw a line through the eyes to make sure you're tilting the head correctly. So all these things are relationships, and the more you check the relationships as you draw, the better your drawing is going to turn out. Now, I do all this by just eyeballing it because I've been drawing for so many years, but when you're starting out, you may want to use a ruler, and that's perfectly fine. Do whatever works for you. And while we're talking about reference points, I must mention the grid. This is a really helpful tool because it gives you reference points which are fixed and dependable. You can make the grid as simple or as complicated as you want. I used a very simple grid, just 4 squares, to help me with this drawing. A grid can make a big complex image into several smaller, less complicated images, and that just makes it a lot easier to get things in the right place. Learn to see angles. This is another aspect of relationships. Every shape that we perceive has edges, and all those edges, even the curved ones, have angles. When you get better at seeing the angles and how they relate to each other, it's like a superpower. You get much better at getting all the pieces of your puzzle to fit together. If part of your drawing is looking a little funky, check the angles. Maybe you have them too steep or not steep enough. Sometimes you might have the angle headed down when it's really headed up. A lot of times I will think I've got the angle right, but then it doesn't look right, and I check it with a straight edge. I lay the straight edge down on my source image to check, and it turns out I've got the angle headed up when it should be headed down. Sometimes a subtle angle can fool you that way. So zoom in on that angle and use a straight edge if you need to get it right. Like I said, once you really get good with angles, noticing them and getting good at putting them down accurately, it's like a superpower. So let's review. Number 1, big shapes. Squint or use an app and use blur to see the big shapes and draw those first. Number 2, negative spaces. Learn to see the negative spaces as well as the positive ones. Number 3, relationships. There's lots of ways to check relationships. Use them all to make sure that everything is fitting together. And number 4, angles. Pay attention to angles. Use a straight edge if you need to. Angles are a superpower. So like I said at the beginning of this video, drawing is hard. But what I'm really saying is that learning to see shapes and how they relate to each other, learning to see like an artist, is hard. Practice seeing this way. Do the hard work of actually looking, and your drawing will get much easier. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you picked up some tips. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please do. That inspires me to do more videos. And if you're feeling a little inspired, great. Pull out that image you've been wanting to draw and start practicing seeing like an artist.